There are stories that live only in bedtime whispers, and others that drift like fog between trees, half believed, half forgotten. This is not one of those. This story, buried in the bones of a town called Briar Hollow, was never told to make children sleep. It was told to make them feel, to remind them, and all of us, that even the smallest tear can call something greater than fear, if you are willing to believe. In a forgotten orphanage, where silence hung thicker than cobwebs and smiles were rationed like bread, lived a girl who had never spoken a word. No one knew why. No one even tried to understand. Until one stormy night, she cried, just once, and from the shadows, something came. A creature. A comfort. A guardian in the shape of a dog. But this was no ordinary dog. And what followed was no ordinary tale. This is the story of a girl who couldn't speak, and the beast that heard her anyway. Mara was the kind of child who disappeared into corners. Not because she was sneaky, but because the world had long stopped looking for her. She came to Briar Hollow in the middle of winter, bundled in a carriage driven by a man no one recognized, and left without so much as a goodbye. The woman who ran the orphanage, Miss Kettle, had no idea who had signed the ledger. The page was damp. The ink had bled. All that remained was a name stitched into the hem of the girl's coat. Mara. She was pale, even for winter. Her hair was long and matted. Her boots were 2 sizes too small. But none of that mattered as much as what was missing. Her voice. Days passed. Then, weeks. Mara did not speak. She did not shout when pushed. She did not laugh when tickled. She did not scream when she fell from the steps and bruised her ribs. She simply existed. And that frightened the other children more than any tantrum could have. She was not mean, not cruel, just silent. Sometimes they'd throw pebbles at her from across the yard just to see if she'd flinch. She never did. Other times, they'd sneak up and shout near her ears. Still nothing. It became a game. Make Mara, make a sound. No one ever won. She slept by the attic window, the one that overlooked the edge of the woods. Miss Kettle said the room was for punishment, too drafty, too far from the others. But Mara never complained. She liked the quiet. And though she never said a word, there were nights when she hummed. Low. Software. Almost like the wind singing through pine needles. Miss Kettle once crept up to listen, thinking perhaps the girl was finally speaking in her sleep. But it was only that strange humming, unsettling in its calmness. The other children avoided her, except for one. His name was Eli. Eli had been there longer than most, and unlike the others, he didn't try to break Mara's silence. He simply sat beside her at meals, shared his gloves when hers had holes, and once traded his dinner roll for her sketchbook when Miss Kettle tried to burn it. He didn't ask why she didn't speak. He didn't need to. They understood each other. Or at least, he tried to understand her. Which made him the first person who ever did. It happened one night, when the storms came early. The sky cracked open with thunder, and the windows rattled like bones. Most of the children huddled in the cellar. But Mara sat alone by the attic window, knees hugged to her chest. She stared into the trees, and for the first time in her life, at least, the first time anyone would know of, she cried. One tear, a single drop, sliding down her cheek and landing on the wooden floor. She didn't sob, didn't sniffle, just wept, silently, like a ghost grieving something only she could see. And then, a sound, from under her bed. At first, she thought it was the storm, but it was steady, breathing. Then, movement, a paw, then another, and out crawled a dog, large, gray, silent. Its fur looked like mist spun into muscle. Its eyes gleamed like moonlight caught in a puddle. It didn't bark, didn't wag, just lay beside her, placing its head gently against her knee. Mara didn't move. She should have screamed, called for help. But something deep inside, some ancient place behind her ribs, knew. This was not something to fear. This was something she had been waiting for. She curled beside it, closed her eyes, and for the first time since arriving in Briar Hollow, Mara slept without waking. In the morning, the dog was gone. No footprints, no hair on the blanket, only a damp paw print near the window. She said nothing, but that day, when one of the girls called her a ghost and pushed her in the hallway, Mara stood still. And for the first time, the girl who pushed her stumbled back, as if something unseen growled just behind her shoulder. From that moment on, no one touched Mara again. They didn't dare. Because even though she was quiet, there was something else now. Something watching. And sometimes, in the very corner of the eye, in that blink between light and shadow, the children swore they saw it. A shape. A tail. A dog. Sitting. Waiting. Just behind Mara. Just out of reach. And always silent. After that first night, something shifted in Mara's world. The cold felt a little warmer, the nights a little less heavy, and though she didn't smile, her silences began to feel less hollow and more like presence, as if someone, or something, filled the empty space beside her. The dog returned, not every night, not even on command, but always when she needed him most. Once, when Miss Kettle struck Eli for stealing extra bread to give to Mara, the girl's hands trembled so violently she thought her bones would crack. That night, without sound or warning, the dog appeared again. It didn't lay beside her this time. It stood, facing the door, guarding. When morning came, she found scratches on the floorboards, not angry marks, but like circles drawn slowly with claws. And in the corner, a feather, white, delicate, drifting as if from a wing. No one else saw it, but Eli believed her. He had begun to notice something too. How Mara never flinched anymore. How the other children, once cruel, now passed her in the halls like she was made of smoke and warning. One day, a girl named Cassie cornered Eli in the garden and sneered, "Your ghost girl's cursed. She's got shadows for friends." Before he could speak, a growl rose from the hedges. Not loud, but ancient. Cassie backed away, tripping over her own boots. Eli didn't even look. He just took Mara's hand and said, "Let them talk." That winter, a sickness swept through Briar Hollow. 3 children died in the neighboring town. The orphanage was locked down. Cots were spread in the dining hall. One by one, the children fell ill. Mara never got sick. Neither did Eli. At night, while others coughed and cried, the attic remained still. And sometimes, if you stood quietly in the hall, you could hear a second breath beneath Mara's bed. Slow, steady, protective. Miss Kettle grew restless. She claimed Mara was inviting demons, said her silence was unnatural. She forbade the other children from sitting with her, threatened to burn her drawings. Once, she stormed into the attic holding a Bible and a lit candle. The next morning, her voice was gone. Not hoarse, not injured. Gone. She could speak no more than a mouse. Her screams became whispers. Her shouts nothing but rasp. She never entered the attic again. She never looked Mara in the eye. And she never, ever walked alone after dark. The dog, Mara's silent guardian, began to appear in other ways. The children drew pictures of wolves with golden eyes. One boy, fevered and near delirium, claimed he saw a great gray spirit licking his hands before he recovered. A girl who broke her ankle swore she dreamed of being carried through the snow by warm fur. But none of them connected it to Mara. Only Eli knew. And he never told. Not until the night he was taken. A stranger arrived one evening. Not the usual kind. Not the priests or inspectors or social workers. This man wore no uniform, spoke softly, smiled too much, He said he was from the city, said he'd come to offer adoptions to children who had no chance otherwise. Eli was chosen. He begged to stay. Miss Kettle said no. Mara said nothing. But the night before he was to leave, she wept. Not loudly. Not like a child. Silently. As she always did. And in the shadow of her bed, the dog rose. Eli never left. No carriage arrived the next day. The stranger vanished. His room was untouched. No one remembered speaking to him. Only Mara knew. And when Eli returned to breakfast, unclaimed, untouched, he sat beside her and whispered, "Thank you." She didn't nod, didn't smile. But the dog sat at their feet, invisible to the world. And for the first time, Mara reached out and scratched behind his ear. He leaned in and closed his eyes. For a time, things grew still at Briar Hollow. Mara's world didn't become brighter, exactly, but it became bearable. The air no longer pressed against her chest. The attic, once cold and hollow, now held warmth in the shape of fur and breath. And Eli was still beside her, his presence constant as the moonlight that spilled across the attic floor. But the peace would not last. Peace never does, in places built on forgotten sorrow. It began with a letter, a real one, ink not yet faded, seal still intact. It arrived one morning tucked beneath the front door, as though placed there by hand. Not a courier, not the post. Miss Kettle read it in silence, her face tightening with every line. Later, the children would say her hands trembled. They would say she dropped her teacup. They would say she looked toward the attic and muttered, "No, not again." By evening, the attic door was locked. Mara wasn't inside. Because that morning, before anyone awoke, she had wandered into the woods. No one knew why. Not even Eli. He woke to find her bed untouched, her boots gone, and a sketch of a tree pinned to the window. Not just any tree. A twisted pine with 3 branches snapped at perfect right angles. The children had seen it before, at the edge of the woods near the forgotten well. It was a place no one dared go. Not since the drowning. Not since the voices. But Mara had. And she hadn't come back. The search was disorganized. Miss Kettle refused to leave the house, muttering about curses and old debts. Eli begged the older boys to help. They went reluctantly, muttering prayers, carrying sticks, like they'd fight ghosts with splinters. They searched for hours. No footprints. No scarf. Nothing. Until Eli found the tree. And beneath it, not Mara, but her sketchbook. Open. Pages fluttering in the wind. The drawings inside were different. No longer of animals or orphans. They were maps. Circles. Spirals. Lines leading deeper into the forest. At the bottom of the last page was a single line, written in her neat, silent script. "He's calling." They returned empty-handed. The house fell into hush. No meals were served. The other children didn't dare ask. And Eli sat by the window, waiting. For days. Then weeks. Until one night, just as the moon slipped behind a cloud, he heard it. A howl. Not close, but not far. He ran. No boots. No coat. Just his breath and her name. He followed the sound to the edge of the trees. There, in the snow, paw prints. Large, deep, leading inward. And beside them, smaller prints. Mara's. He walked for what felt like hours. Through thorn and frost, over roots and frozen stream beds. The prints remained steady, unbroken. He called for her. Once, twice. No reply. Then, just as doubt threatened to drag him back, he saw her. Standing in a clearing. Alone. Unmoving. And beside her, the dog. But it wasn't the same. It was larger. Taller than him. Eyes like stars swallowed by night. And between them, a door. Wooden. Arched. Ancient. Built into nothing. A doorway with no frame, no wall, just standing, impossibly, in the clearing. The dog turned, looked at Eli, then at Mara. She didn't speak, but her eyes said everything. Stay. She stepped through. The dog followed, and the door vanished. Eli screamed her name, ran to the spot, fell to his knees. But there was nothing. Only snow. Only silence. Only sky. Mara was gone. And this time, even the dog didn't come back. Eli didn't remember how he got back. One moment he was on his knees in the snow, breath breaking in clouds, throat raw from shouting. The next, silence. The clearing was empty. The strange door was gone. And Mara, with her shadow wolf guardian, had vanished as if they'd never been. He stumbled home in the gray hours of dawn, frost clinging to his lashes, blood on his palms where thorns had bitten deep. Miss Kettle said nothing when he pushed through the doors. She only stared at him, as if expecting worse. He went to bed, fully clothed, and didn't rise for 2 days. When he woke, something in him had changed. For weeks, he didn't speak. Not because he couldn't, but because he no longer trusted that words could shape the world. Not after watching one disappear. The other children whispered. Rumors bloomed like mold. That Mara had been eaten by the forest, or stolen by spirits, or had never existed at all. But Eli knew better. He began collecting things, scraps of her sketches, pieces of bark from the twisted pine, paw prints pressed into wax. At night, he mapped everything. The clearing, the door, the dog. He wrote what little he remembered. Drew lines where paths had been, symbols where sounds had echoed. It wasn't much, but it was something. Then, late one night, a single howl broke the quiet. Not in the woods, in the garden. He rushed to the window, and saw it. Not the dog, not Mara. A crack. Thin, golden, in the air, like a seam torn in the very fabric of night. He ran. Outside, the cold gripped him like a fist, but he didn't feel it. The crack pulsed, and before his eyes, it widened. Just enough to see a flicker of light beyond it. Then came a voice. Software. Familiar. Not spoken. Remembered. Mara's. Eli. The air split, and something stepped through. Not Mara. The dog. Smaller now, but changed. Its fur shimmered with frost. Its eyes held galaxies. It sat, watched him, and slowly, gently, laid something at his feet. Her ribbon. Still tied in a perfect bow. Eli fell to his knees. "Where is she?" he whispered. The dog didn't speak, but it didn't need to. Images flashed in Eli's mind. Mara, standing in a place not made of earth or sky. A hallway of memory, with doors opening into light and storm. She was walking, always walking, guided by something unseen. He saw her smile. Then, darkness. The vision faded, and the dog licked his hand. Once, then turned, and stepped back through the crack. The golden seam sealed behind it. The next morning, Eli began to speak again, but not of what he saw. He simply asked Miss Kettle for wood, nails, and quiet. She granted all three. By week's end, a shrine stood beneath the attic window, a frame of branches shaped like an arch. At its center, her ribbon, pressed in glass. Some children mocked it, others left offerings. But all agreed. When the wind howled just right, it sounded like someone humming a lullaby made of stars. One night, a year after her disappearance, a storm fell upon Briar Hollow. The house groaned. The walls shook. Eli couldn't sleep. He climbed to the attic, stared out into the dark. And then, lightning split the sky. And in its flash, he saw a girl standing at the tree line. Not older, not different. Just there. And beside her, the dog. They didn't wave. They didn't move. But they were watching. And Eli whispered, "I see you." When the light faded, so had they. But he knew now. Mara wasn't gone. She had escaped. Not from the world, but into it. Somewhere deeper, wider, waiting for the time she could return. And when she did, he would be ready. Because the dog had left a path, and Eli was still watching the sky for cracks. Years passed in Briar Hollow. Eli grew, not just in height, but in heart. He became the quiet boy who listened more than he spoke, who remembered more than he revealed. The shrine beneath the attic window remained untouched, except by time and wind. Some nights, he would sit beside it, fingers tracing the ribbon's soft edges, eyes turned toward the forest. Others forgot. He didn't. Because deep down, he knew. One day, the forest would give her back. Not as she was, but as she was meant to be. The day came when Briar Hollow changed. A storm unlike any before rolled in, not of thunder, but of silence. The sky turned violet. The wind spoke in a forgotten tongue, and every animal in the village turned its eyes toward the pines. Then, just as the church bell rang noon, the air split open. At the center of town, before the old well, a light shimmered, not golden, not silver, but both, a seam, a door, and through it, she walked. Mara. Not a girl, not a ghost, something more. Her eyes still quiet, her steps still gentle, but her presence unmistakable. The dog followed, older now, his fur kissed with white, his eyes soft with eternity. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The children gathered first, then the adults. No one moved. Then Eli stepped forward. He said only one word. "Welcome." She smiled, and the dog bowed its head. Mara never explained where she'd been. Not in words, but in actions. She walked through the village, touching trees that hadn't bloomed in years, whispered into wells long dried, sat beside children who cried in secret, and simply stayed. And the dog watched it all, still guarding, still waiting, still listening. One evening, Mara climbed the hill beyond the village, the one where the stars felt close enough to touch. Eli followed. They sat in silence for a long while. Then Mara turned to him, eyes shining, and for the first time since she was a child, she spoke. "I found my voice." Eli blinked, stunned. "Where?" She looked to the sky. "Where everything lost goes to be remembered." And just like that, she was gone. Not vanished, just returned to where she belonged. But the dog stayed, because there were still more to guide, still more to guard, still more tears to answer. And in Briar Hollow, every child knew, if you ever feel truly alone, if your heart cracks open quietly in the dark, look to the trees. You might not see him, but he will be there. Because once, a long time ago, a girl cried, and something answered, and it never stopped listening.